Bonjour à tous, bienvenue à la conférence de presse de Paul Murphy, qui cette fois est accompagné par Claudia Saba, qui est comme représentante de l'Irish Bot to Gaza. Thank you. Et à laquelle je passe tout de suite la parole. Claudia.
I've come here to talk a little bit about the rationale behind Irish Ship to Gaza, behind the flotillas and the most recent initiative known as Freedom Waves. What we are is a group of people who simply do not want to sit back and do nothing about what is happening in Gaza, about what is happening in Palestine in general, and what has been happening for decades. There is a pro-Palestinian solidarity movement that has been growing in recent years, and the reason it has been growing is because governments and the international community have failed to act. They have failed to bring the tragedy that is happening in the Palestinian territories, in the Palestinian occupied territories, to an end. And so people have decided to take direct action to do something about that situation. In Irish Ship to Gaza, we discuss what our aims are as a movement and as part of a greater movement. And I want to make this very clear. We are not a charity movement. We are not bringing aid to a famine-stricken area that is undergoing a crisis because of any kind of natural disaster. We are addressing the very core of the issue in Gaza and of Palestine as a whole, and that is the lack of freedom of an entire people. So when we get criticized for not having maybe brought enough aid on our boats, there are 1.6 million people in Gaza living in dire circumstances. There is no way that we can bring enough aid to help them out. And in any case, they do not want aid, they do not want charity. What they want is freedom to be able to export and import goods. They want freedom of movement, like all other people have around the world. Just two words about summarize. I mean, I will summarize the situation in Gaza, I'm sure. You have heard it before, but it's important enough to stress. More than 2/3 of households in Gaza are food insecure. The so-called easing of the blockade that followed the flotilla of 2010 has not improved that situation. We still have more than 2/3 of households food insecure and relying on aid. Families are having to make unacceptable choices between spending money on food or spending money on water, clean water, or spending money on medicines. That's unacceptable. 35% of arable land is inaccessible to Palestinians there, and 85% of fishing waters are inaccessible. 90% of the water that's available is unfit for human consumption. There is raw sewage being disposed of in places where it's polluting the water, the underground coastal aquifer, which is Gaza's only source of water. Poverty is not going to be improved, according to Special Rapporteur on Poverty and Human Rights, Magdalena Sepulveda from the United Nations. It is not going to be improved unless all of Gaza's entry points are opened immediately to facilitate the freedom of movement of people and goods. We often hear words of condemnation from political leaders about what is going on in Gaza, and many international organizations have called for the lifting of the blockade. We get a lot of words of condemnation and of concern, but what we don't get is action. Palestinians in Gaza have been dehumanized. We have come to think of them as people who just need aid. And I think we need to move away from that way of thinking and start to address the much larger political disaster, because again, this is not a natural disaster, the much larger political disaster that has taken place and that has dehumanized an entire population. Half of the population over there are under the age of 18, so they are children. And we cannot be accepting a situation where an entire population is punished because of some spurious Israeli security concerns. The Israelis have a right to their security concerns, but unfortunately we never talk about the Palestinian security concerns, and they are being sacrificed at the level of an entire population. I'll give the word now to Paul Murphy, who was one of the very brave people who boarded the boats, one of the boats, the Irish boat that went to Gaza last week, but whose mission was violently intercepted by the State of Israel.
Thank you very much, Claudia. First of all, I want to thank everybody who played a marvellous role in protesting about our detention around the world in this Parliament. Many, many MEPs who took actions across the world, many protests in Ireland, hundreds of people protesting, even within Israel itself, protests of people demanding our release. What I'll do is try to, very briefly, because obviously it was a 1 week long period, but condense that into the experiences that we had as the prisoners, how we were taken, violently assaulted and so on, because I think it is illustrative of the way in which the Israeli regime defends its blockade, illegal blockade of Gaza, and you get a microcosm or a fraction really of the way in which the people of Gaza are treated, who in effect are in an open air prison. So we were on, like Claudia was saying, the Irish boat, the MV Saoirse. There was 2 boats as part of this freedom wave, the MV Saoirse and the Canadian boat, the Tahrir. Our boat was on the Friday early afternoon, violently assaulted by the Israeli forces. 5 very large warships surrounded the boats. These were very serious warships with a large number of guns on board, helicopters on board. From those warships came around 20 smaller boats, Zodiacs, boats with high-pressure water cannons, and boats designed for boarding the boats that we had. The Israelis surrounded the 2 boats. They deliberately, with their water cannons, created waves in the water to press the 2 boats against each other, which resulted in the 2 boats crashing into each other and a very serious danger of sinking for both boats. They used the high-pressure water to completely douse the boats, which got inside the boats. In the case of the Irish boat, they sprayed water at high pressure onto the bridge of the boat, which caused the electronics to explode, to go on fire on the boat, to mean that the main generator on the boat, which was being used to pump out water that was coming on the boat as a result of the collision, was then gone and was out of action, and more water was being taken on the boat. The Israelis, after surrounding both of the boat, the Israeli forces, came on board with a lot of violence, breaking one of the windows. About 25 very heavily armed soldiers with big machine guns, pistols, knives, tasers, other ammunition came on board. About 25 came on board the Irish boat, pointing weapons in everybody's faces and trying to take control of the boat. They took down the Palestinian flag that was flying on the boat and attempted to replace it with an Israeli flag, which the activists protested about that, and they backed down from replacing it with an Israeli flag. They took down the Irish flag that was on the boat and attempted to steal that flag. Again, we protested about that, and they took the flag out of the bag. On that basis, they effectively took control of the boat, and they brought us against our will into Israeli waters and into the port of Ashdod. There we were going to be, it was clear that the soldiers were then replaced by the police, and it was clear we were going to be violently taken off the boat. And it was at that stage we reminded them that there was an MEP on board, there was other elected politicians from Ireland on board. And on that basis they somewhat backed down from that position, and a woman from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs came on board the boat to reassure us that everything was fine, to make a whole series of promises, all of which were lies. And on that basis, we agreed to leave the boat. Some of the promises she made, which were made in the presence of an official from the Irish embassy in Israel, were that our return home to Ireland would be expedited, which obviously wasn't the case. It took 7 days for us to go home, well over the 72 hours supposedly required by Israeli law. We were promised that we wouldn't be strip searched, when literally half an hour later, after her telling us this, we were strip searched down to our underwear. We were promised that there would be a judge present at the detention centre who would immediately rule on our case, and in order to expedite our departure. We didn't see a judge for days. We were promised that that evening we would receive phone calls to family to reassure people that everyone was okay. Again, it was about 35 hours after that moment that we received our first and only phone call, which was one 3-minute phone call monitored by 3 or 4 people and monitored on a computer, in which we were explicitly told we could only talk in good terms about the conditions which we were being held. We couldn't mention anything political, and we were only to speak to members of our families. So a whole series of lies designed to get us off the boat. We were then taken off the boat, strip searched in a dehumanising fashion, taken to a detention centre, asked to sign a deportation order that we refused to sign because it was an acceptance of having entered Israel illegally, when obviously it's completely ridiculous. We didn't enter Israel illegally. We were kidnapped in international waters and brought to Israel against our wishes. And then from there, very early on Saturday morning, about 4 a.m., we were brought to Givon prison, where we were kept until the following Thursday, late afternoon. The conditions in Givon prison initially were very harsh. On the first night, some people were awoken up to 5 times in the course of the evening and told to stand to attention. You had to stand, answer your name, etc. The lights were left on all night. We were allowed no reading material. We were allowed no writing material. We were kept in our cell for out of the first 24 hours, we were kept in our cell for at least 21 of those 24 hours. On the basis of our protests inside the prison and getting organised, and the protests that happened around the world and in Israel, those conditions did improve. We won free association, so the right for the prisoners to associate between the hours of 8 and 8 without being locked in our cell, the right to our reading material, the right to our writing material. In effect, we won political status, which is the correct status for us. But we still only received that one phone call, 3-minute phone call. We were still at all times kept completely isolated from the media. It was clearly the intention of the Israeli authorities to get their version of the story out. Once we came to Ashdod, all electronic equipment was taken from us and has not been returned. I have a laptop provided by the European Parliament that's now in the possession of the Israeli military, a mobile phone, all the cameras, memory cards, anything that had any evidence of what happened on the boats and the violent assault was taken off us. And then the Israeli military released a very selected footage of what happened, which is their version of what happened, which makes everything look tame. So there was an attempt to completely make the story themselves in the media, while we were locked away, kept completely isolated, not able to talk to the media, but also we weren't able even to receive any media. So the Irish Embassy, who visit us on a basically daily basis, tried to give us newspapers with extracts dealing with how the flotilla was being covered at home, and the Israeli jails refused to allow us to get that access to the media, to keep us completely disoriented. We weren't allowed watches in the prison. The clock for the first 2 days was deliberately wrong and misleading in the prison, just to create a situation of disorientation where you don't know what's happening, and isolation. So that went on until, well, for some peaceful protesters, until the Thursday, originally, one of the things was just completely misleading information on an ongoing basis from everybody to the Irish Embassy, to ourselves. So some people would come and tell us that we're going to be held indefinitely, that the Israeli state has the right to hold us indefinitely. The judge who came told us that, person from the Interior Ministry told us that, which was completely illegal and incorrect. And then we were told via the Irish Embassy that we would leave on the Monday night originally, which is when the 72 hours expired, then the Tuesday morning, Tuesday afternoon, Wednesday. And it was only then on the Wednesday afternoon that the first protesters were taken away, which we thought they were taken to an airport and to be brought away, but they were actually brought to another detention centre, which I'll describe in a moment. And then on the Thursday, they were due to fly in the morning. And first of all, I mean, the Israeli embassy in Ireland, and I presume internationally, has released a story saying that British Airways refused to take the protesters. There were 7 people due to travel on a British Airways flight. The Israeli authorities had 7 tickets for the 7 protesters to take that flight. They only brought 2 of the activists to the airport. The other were left in their cell in Ben Gurion Airport, near Ben Gurion Airport. The 2 that were brought there were then brought to the aeroplane, were brought away from the aeroplane, were searched again at length and for a long period of time. Were then brought back, the airplane was gone, then, oh well, you've missed your flight. The same almost happened again to a later flight that they were due to get, where this time all 7 were brought to the flight, but 5 were allowed to board, 2 who will be identified as the organisers were taken away, were searched again at length, designed to make them miss the flight. Then they were brought back to the flight, but the flight actually hadn't gone yet. It was delayed for other reasons. So the Israeli authorities, the people driving the van, saw that the plane was still there, stopped the van and said there's a problem with the passports, and drove back to the detention centre, which then that story was completely forgotten because there was no problem with the passports whatsoever. But it was, and then finally, those 2 got on a flight that evening, again against the wishes of the authorities, who said that they had missed the flight, that it was too late to check in. It was only someone in the detention centre checked in for them, and then they were able to leave. So it was clear that on the Thursday, the Israeli authorities, and that's what this was all about, was about punishing people who had engaged in this protest, to send a message not to participate in attempts to break the blockade again, and also a massive insult to the Irish embassy that had played a key role in organising these tickets. And the Irish embassy was outraged in Israel. We left on the Friday morning. The conditions on Thursday night in the detention centre were horrific. We were there for one night. I shared a cell with 6 other people from different countries who were being expelled from the country, from Israel. The light was left on all night. You had only the clothes you had on you. People were locked in the cell, and that was it. If people wanted to go to the toilet, they just were ignored. People weren't allowed to smoke cigarettes. There was human excrement smeared on the walls in the cell. It was really, really horrific conditions designed to send a message. Finally, we arrived home on the Friday. Obviously, very, very happy to be home. The main point for me, it's not that, I mean, it's outrageous how we were treated as, peaceful activists. But it is the fact that the Israeli authorities act in such a way at peaceful activists trying to break the siege of Gaza. It shows how the people of Gaza are treated. It shows how Palestinian political prisoners are treated. The 1.6 million people in Gaza, we had running water at all stages. 100,000 of them don't have access to running water. So that's the real point. In terms of what I would raise as a demand, I think there has to be a response. It's not acceptable that the Israeli authorities are able to operate in this way with impunity and break laws repeatedly. We have raised the demand in Ireland, and I'll raise it here again, that the Israeli ambassador to Ireland should be expelled from the country. On a European level, I would call for the EU-Israel Association Agreement to be suspended until the blockade of Gaza is lifted. And I've sent a letter this morning to President Buzek, who did on the Thursday call for my release, calling for the credentials to be suspended from the Israeli embassy officials in the European Parliament, that to treat 15 EU citizens like this, it can't go unanswered, and the misinformation that was given. We have copies of the letter to President Buzek that will be distributed.
Merci Paul Murphy pour ce compte rendu plutôt impressionnant. Il nous reste 7 minutes. Si vous avez des questions à poser à Paul ou à Claudia, c'est le moment.
Hi, question about the response from Ireland and from the Parliament. Could you clarify a little bit better what do you expect from the Irish government to do now towards Israel? And also there were reports about some disappointment with Buzek's reaction, saying it was rather lame, or that it didn't clearly state that you were taken from international waters, blah, blah, blah. Could you maybe say your opinion on that? And then third question. I mean, clearly the flotilla, it hasn't worked. It's been stopped over and over, and the international community doesn't really seem to even bother anymore to condemn the fact that you're being taken from international waters over and over. Is this really the right way to go about the blockade? I'm not saying it isn't, I'm asking you. Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of the Irish government had a completely insufficient response while we were in prison. It took a very long time for them to call for our quick release, which eventually, whenever the 72 hours had passed and so on, then they began to call for that. But it was clear that, I mean, the Irish government, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, took at their word the Israeli authorities. So whenever the messing around of the activists to detain them on Thursday took place, the Minister of Foreign Affairs got up in the Irish Parliament and said, he just repeated the Israeli line about what had happened, that British Airways had refused to take the passengers. When I had spoken to the Irish ambassador to Israel on the morning of the Friday, who was incandescent with rage at the way that the protesters had been treated. So it was entirely insufficient throughout the course of our detention. Now, I think there has to be a response, a real response that reflects the way in which we were treated, but also the way in which the Irish Embassy to Israel was treated. And what we've called for is that the Israeli embassy in Ireland should be expelled from the country. The ambassador should be expelled from Ireland in response to what's happened. In terms of President Buzek, in my opinion, it was late that he did call for our release. I welcome the fact that he did call for our release, but I think everything should have happened quicker. It's not a question of there being an MEP in prison, it's a question of there being 15 EU citizens and others being detained without charge. And you have to remember, attempting to break a blockade that the European Parliament has deemed to be illegal. Finally, on the question of the flotilla, Claudia might also maybe want to answer that. I mean, see, it was my expectation that we would be intervened with and stopped. We were hoping that we would get there, and if we got there, that would have been brilliant. But certainly, we knew it was a large chance that they would intervene and stop us. So the question of whether it's a success or not, I think you can classify it as a success in the sense that a key purpose, from my point of view, is about raising consciousness, raising awareness about what's happening in Gaza, that if it serves to expose the behaviour of the Israeli state, how they treat people, I mean, they kept us well after the 72 hours, and they did themselves no favours by doing that, because they turned it into a story in Ireland and across Europe, the fact that they had detained people for 7 days, and they exposed themselves and the way they behave. So I think, I mean, a very, very important point of the flotilla is about awareness raising, encouraging people to protest, giving people confidence to protest. And so I think from that it has proved successful.
Je vous en prie.
Ray Colgan from Irish TV. Given that this operation has now been tried twice, I think you've indicated that you can't really be all that surprised at how the Israelis reacted. Not justifying it, obviously, but it seems to be very much a response that didn't take you by surprise. How useful would a third attempt at this be? And is there not a point where maybe it's counterproductive, that it starts looking a little bit like tilting at windmills, maybe?
I think that the most similar, perhaps, struggle to what is going on now with the Palestine solidarity struggle could be the American civil rights movement and also the movement against apartheid South Africa. The actual form of protest that we take is not what is important. So, you know, this time we had boats, but we could modify our tactic and use something else. The purpose, however, is twofold. One is to put the spotlight on Gaza. I mean, during the last couple of weeks while we were organizing this mission and executing it, about 12 Palestinians were killed in Gaza that hardly made the news. And since the beginning of 2008, 2,800 Palestinians have been killed. This is according to an Israeli human rights group. I mean, these are staggering numbers that hardly get any media attention. I think what we do by putting the spotlight on the region is we provide some political space and some media space for the issues in Palestine to be discussed again. So that is one of our achievements, and that is why we'll continue with these efforts, it will not always be boats. It can be anything. There was a flotilla in June, which had nothing to do with the flotilla, but they kind of copied the name, I guess. And the intention of it was, again, to show the world that you cannot go to Palestine without passing through Israeli borders. It's the same in the West Bank. The entire West Bank is surrounded by Israeli borders. And we're trying to highlight the fact that Palestinians are not free.
Sorry, are you ruling out a third flotilla or not?
We will modify our tactics as we see fit. I'm not ruling it out.
La dernière question.
Thank you for your presentation. I have a question about the UN position on this and your response to it. So according to the UN Palmer report, the Palmer Commission report called the blockade actually illegal under international law. So if we take that, then you could be accused of actually violating international law on the Israeli side by taking part in the flotilla against Gaza. What would be your response to this?
The Palmer report was a report designed to be a whitewash from the very beginnings in terms of the makeup of that panel. In particular, the vice president of the panel is Uribe, the former president of Colombia, a well-known friend of the Israeli regime, a abuser of human rights in his own country. The Palmer report did not interview, the Palmer panel, they didn't interview any new witnesses. They had no power to interview any witnesses whatsoever. They simply went on statements that had been made previously. It was not in their remit to find about the legality or illegality of the blockade of Gaza. And it was an attempt to whitewash from the beginning, which then did that in an attempt to mend relations between Turkey and Israel. And the authors of the original UN report, which said that 6 of the 9 people who were killed on the Mavai Marmara last year had been at least 6 of the 9 had been summarily executed by the Israeli forces, restated that opinion, restated their opinion about the illegality of the blockade of Gaza in the aftermath of the Palmer report. So the Palmer report doesn't change anything from our point of view.
Yes, but even the EU Commissioner for Human Rights, Georgieva, affirmed that she said that this is not the way that the EU would act in its policy to Gaza. She said, we're not in favour of attempts to help people in this way.
I disagree with, in advance of the attempt for the flotilla to go 3 months ago, Catherine Ashton said that this was the wrong response to what's happening in Gaza. But the reality, in my opinion, is that the EU in many cases is complicit in the oppression of the Palestinians. Funding for research goes to Israeli armaments companies that are then used to kill Palestinians. So the EU, which poses as an honest broker in the region, I think has a lot to answer for as well.
Notre temps termine ici. Je rappelle à tout le monde que demain, mon groupe organise une initiative dans la salle S2.1 sur les prisonniers palestiniens, les prisonniers politiques palestiniens. Je remercie Paul, je remercie Claudia et je remercie les interprètes. Merci beaucoup.